Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast Training Camp Edition. We've made it, everyone. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Joining me, as always, the one, the only, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm happy that we have a lot of AFC training camp storylines to go over. But sad day, my friend. The injury bug has finally attacked the NFL, as it does every year. You know, we're trying to go to Mars. We've allegedly put people on the moon, yet, Dwain, we can't cure knee injuries still. Tim Patrick, we don't know. MRI. Broncos fear is going to be serious. Irv Smith, maybe back week one, probably back by week one. He fractured his thumb. You know, hopefully that sick Hulk tattoo is not a big issue. Even Skyy Moore is going down to drill, Dwain. Not a great day to be great for those guys. Hopefully the podcast still will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we'll touch on some more of those guys as we go through the teams. But yeah, as soon as the pads go on, man, you know how it goes. This is what starts happening. As excited as we get about it, because, you know, that just means we're that much closer to real football. It also, the reality of the injuries definitely set in right now.
So for today's podcast, Dwain had two awesome articles go up on PFF.com over the last week. Basically, his top training camp storyline for every AFC team and then the NFC team. So we're going to go through every AFC team today with Dwain's top storyline. Also, in the meantime, I have gone through every single training camp article from The Athletic. I skimmed it. I didn't read every word. I love it. But, you know, it's fantasy. I focus on the fantasy guys. Okay. I got that off my chest. We're good. I did that. Looked through a bunch of the ESPN stuff as well. Also, cannot say enough great things about the 32 Beat Writers Twitter account at 32 Beat Writers. Whoever runs that does a great job compiling everywhere. Yes. And also the fine folks at NBC Sports Edge, their news page. So I want to give a shout out to all those people for most of the information I was able to get today. So with all that said, Dwain, let's start off with the Baltimore Ravens. Look, common storyline with a lot of these is going to be the presence of injuries. You know, we don't really care if a guy caught a touchdown last Tuesday in practice or not. We care, are they going to be on the field to catch touchdowns come week one? Still a lot of questions here in this Baltimore Ravens backfield.
Yeah, and I think the easy slam dunk question for the Ravens, and one quick note, like the way I try to approach most of these, if it was a team where I felt like there was a really higher level question that could impact like everyone on the team, I tried to focus on that. Then, you know, you're looking at some of the camp battles, the roles, those sort of things, but also the injuries, you know, like you mentioned. So every team, you know, I tried to narrow it down to one, which is awesome because now you have the other, you know, information that we can also quickly touch on. But for the Baltimore Ravens, I do think it's a pretty simple one. You know, when will J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards be ready to play? You know, what we've heard, and even Doug Kyed put out an article today where he even surveyed, you know, some of the NFL front offices just trying to check in and like figure out like what's going on with all these injuries. J.K. Dobbins started the, you know, training camp on the PUP. He's still on the PUP right now, but they do seem to feel optimistic, Ian, that he is going to be that he'll be ready, you know, for week one. But he is coming off of that multi-ligament injury. If you look at Mario Pallato's work over on PFF, where he actually went and looked at some of the research that's out there about this, only 30% of the backs that have a multi-ligament injury return to the full season form that they had the year before and the year after the injury. So there's a good chance with Dobbins, even if he's healthy, Ian, we may not see the honestly elite as you would say, borderline erotic what we saw from Dobbins as a rookie. Just, you know, blew things away from a standpoint of missed tackles force, from yards after contact, explosive rush rate, all those things.
He averaged 6 yards per carry. We don't even need to get into those other things, like 6 yards per carry, all you need to know there. But yeah, Dwain, you put it perfect, man. It's not, I mean, and that was why he was as effective as he could be, because we've talked about the issue with mobile quarterbacks and the things that have gone on in Buffalo. So they're scrambling instead of checking down, and they become basically another part of the committee near the goal line. So good note here from Ravens beat writer Jamison Hensley in an ESPN article. This is Jamison writing. The Ravens' top two running backs, Dobbins and Edwards, are on the PUP list after tearing ACLs last summer. Dobbins is expected to be back by the start of the regular season, but it's uncertain whether he will be at full strength at that point. Edwards is farther behind Dobbins in his recovery and could miss a chunk of the season. Bro, it's been all about Dobbins the whole time. Like, that was the first time I even kind of saw something of a timeline thrown out there with Gus Edwards. I have not been drafting him for the better part of the last 3-4 weeks, ever since this started to become a little bit more clear that he could also be heavily behind. only other kind of minor things I saw, Dwayne, we got a bulked up Lamar Jackson throwing the ball better than ever, apparently. Rashad Bateman flashing, getting every chance as the wide receiver 1. James Prosto, number 2. Fun quote from Lamar Jackson, calling rookie tight end Isaiah Likely baby Mark Andrews. So really, Dwayne, I think just, again, main thing in Baltimore, it's going to be figuring out this running back room, because if it's not Dobbins and Edwards out there, Mike Davis, Tyler Beatty, Justice Hill, this is a situation where, it wouldn't be shocking if they added another free agent, or week 1's going to get here and it's going to be like, shit, we got to get Mike Davis on the squad for some reason.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's the big one there. Right now, the way I'm honestly approaching Dobbins, though, he goes in round 5, of your redraft formats, which isn't terrible, but knowing that we've got the injury situation, knowing that we've got a likely committee, I think it's honestly just still too steep, for Dobbins. Like if he slips into round 6 or 7, right now, knowing what we know, I think you can be more willing to think about him, in redraft. But right now at round 5, man, there's just, we've talked about this before. The quarterbacks, even some of the elite tight ends, like Kittle slips into that range sometimes. And there's just a lot of receivers, especially if you're drafting over on ESPN or Yahoo, where some of these ADPs haven't caught up and you can get access to Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams, players like that. I'm not taking Dobbins over any of those.
For the Buffalo Bills, Dwayne, I feel like you put, a little more detective tone on this blurb. I don't know. Like you're a man that usually wears glasses. I need to as well when I need to see things further away. So no harm in that. I'm just saying, maybe when you're getting, conspiracy Dwayne going, you switch the glasses for sunglasses on the pod. Just a tip. I don't know, but hey, what's your question here for the Bills?
Yeah, so it's just really, why were the Bills so adamant about adding the passing down back to the fold? And, is there really a clear number 2 option behind Stephon Diggs? So if you look at the roster makeup for the Bills, as much as we like Gabe Davis, and we've even talked about Dawson Knox, neither one of them crush their underlying talent metrics that we look for, right? They both still have profiles that say they could go either way. They could be hits. They could also be complete busts. Like there's a chance of that. And so knowing that, like, yeah, we know Diggs can get to 30% target share and he could completely eat in this offense. But there's a real chance that behind Diggs, maybe it's the running backs that get more involved, knowing how heavily Buffalo pursued. And we got additional information last week from Chase Edmonds in an interview that he had talking about how he actually talked to the Bills before he went to the Dolphins. So that's another passing down archetype back that they looked at via free agency. Ultimately, they do settle on James Cook. So the storyline that I'm really following here, Ian, is just really wanting to glean as much as we can and try not to read too much into confirming priors, right? I mean, look, at the end of the day right now, James Cook is easy. You can get him in round 9, round 10. He's probably the passing down back on a pass-heavy offense. You honestly don't even need that much more than that, for the Bills offense. But if we want to really be able to make sure that he has that role, or see if there's potentially an opportunity for him to carve out more work, because I think it's kind of been a foregone conclusion that, he won't get any carries from Devin Singletary. I don't know that that's necessarily true. It may be true, but that's really what I'm looking for, from the Bills beat reporters, from what we may see in the preseason, especially in the snaps with the starters. And again, those things aren't always conclusive, so we may not have the complete answer here, but I think that is a very important question for the Bills.
And there has been a little bit of murmur about Zach Moss also maybe getting involved in this committee, but I don't know. That is one of these training camp storylines that just sounds a little bit like, oh yeah, we have a whole room full of running backs we like, Dwayne. We'll make sure they all get their touches except Duke Johnson, sadly. So looking at that again, James Cook, not overpriced right now. And, the more you kind of talk him up, Dwayne, the more I am coming around to him at cost, particularly in full PPR. The other big storyline has been the performance of Isaiah McKenzie, someone that we were really high on after last season. We saw what he did without Cole Beasley. The Bills got through free agency, didn't make any real investments, but then they went ahead and did sign Jamison Crowder. They get through the draft and they don't do anything other than add the day 3 Boise State talent. So really with Jamison Crowder, I think we kind of figured he would take this starting role for a little bit, but now, Dwayne, we're getting back, and it does seem like McKenzie should maybe, just maybe, be considered the favorite. From Sean McDermott himself, he said the biggest adjustment for McKenzie is, quote unquote, potentially stepping into a full-time role, and teams accordingly game planning for him. I would note, Jamison Crowder hasn't really been practicing because of general soreness, so I don't think he's really had a chance to kind of throw his hat fully into the competition. But at a minimum, Dwayne, we might have underestimated just how much of a chance McKenzie has to lock down that starting slot receiver role, which got Cole Beasley triple-digit targets in each of the last 3 seasons.
And we've just seen McKenzie when he's had that chance as just a more explosive player, right, than what we saw with Cole Beasley. So he can potentially do more.
Yeah.
It probably can't earn quite as many targets as Cole Beasley, right? McKenzie is not the route runner that Cole Beasley is, but you can scheme him up on different types of things. Like you can't. It's hard to run with a guy like Isaiah McKenzie from the slot on a crosser, right, running through traffic. So there's just a lot of things that they can do with him. And so I agree. I think this is a really big one. The other note I did see early in camp, I don't know if you saw this, but was that Crowder was actually taking a few reps outside at the X receiver. So that's something else just to kind of keep an eye on. Is Crowder potentially more of a threat to Gabe Davis? I can't imagine that. I think they need a field stretcher because really Diggs works the intermediate and underneath stuffs. He's the comeback route king. So I feel like you still need a field stretcher out there, but definitely Isaiah McKenzie, he's moving up. Like I think he's moved up 2 to 3 rounds, if I remember correctly, when I was last looking at Fantasy Mojo's data for FFPC drafts. So this is a name that's definitely rising with all the news.
Cincinnati Bengals, Dwain. This time last year, it wasn't the Christian McCaffrey's going to get hurt daily Twitter charade. I guess it also was kind of, I guess it still was that, but the big man that no one could stop talking about, Joe Mixon, and how he just wasn't going to be able to play. Well, he did play all season, ended up turning in an upside RB1 finish. But Dwain, you're still a little bit curious about what exactly is going on behind Joe Mixon.
Yeah. And with the Bengals, honestly, I struggled. There were 2 questions. One, could we expect, the Bengals to really throw the ball like we saw them down the stretch last year?
And how are they going to replace Auden Tate?
And how are they going to? Well, that was actually number 1, but I figured you would run with that storyline, so I didn't want to steal your thunder. But yeah, as far as Mixon goes, I just want to know who's the backup, because 1, you're playing in a really good offense. There's a lot of opportunity to score points. But number 2, specifically, who's handling the passing down role? Because we saw this last year with Mixon, that they were adamant in keeping him off the field on passing downs. And if you listen to the coaching staff, they don't discount Mixon's ability in the passing game. They look at that as being the time that they can just get him off the field and give him rest. Unfortunately, for fantasy players, that is a high leverage situation. We want those targets. We want those checkdowns. We want those receptions. And so it does matter. Like, who's it going to be? Is it going to be P. Ryan or is it going to be Chris Evans? And I think we've gotten a little bit of news. We had Zach Taylor come out, and I believe it was yesterday. It might have been the day before. Ian, you probably have a note on this, but actually said that Samaje Perine does have a leg up right now on Chris Evans, but then also noted, hey, look, it's a long camp. We'll see where these things end up. But right now, Perine does appear to have the slight edge on Evans as the passing down back.
Yep. Pretty much nailed it. The exact quote. He's certainly got a leg up right now in that battle, but that's what training camp is for. Plenty of times guys step up and have huge growth. We'll see where it goes with Perine currently being over Chris Evans. Shout out to Ben Baby over at ESPN, and for my money's worth, the best Bengals beat writer out there, and a fellow Cincinnati native. Makes sense, covers the Bengals. But he said, this is Ben at Ben_baby. From a fantasy perspective, I draft Evans over Perine, but there's no guarantee that pick provides dividends given how the Bengals have used their running backs. So if Mixon gets hurt, Dwain, things get awfully interesting. That's where, maybe Evans can have the sort of, DeAndre Swift, like 10 carries and getting a bunch of targets role. In the meantime, look, it's already hard enough to get standalone value with any RB2. I don't think there's going to be any incentive. I'm not saying we're necessarily expecting that. This is just going to be, a kind of tough situation to continue to monitor. The only other kind of offensive, not issue, but question mark is what exactly is going on at tight end with CJ Uzomah gone. More and more, Dwain, it does look like Hayden Hurst is going to be that guy. He was getting hyped up in OTAs. Now he's being called the quote unquote early winner at Bengals camp. And look, Hayden Hurst, we did our tight end strategy episode last week. Hayden Hurst should never be drafted in a traditional 10, even 12-man redraft format. But Dwain, a lot of us play best ball when we do need 2 or 3 tight ends. Like, once you start getting down in that range, man, Hayden Hurst is now officially like the cheapest tight end that you can somewhat wrap your mind around, having that sort of Robert Tonyan, Dawson Knox sort of explosion, 10 touchdowns on 60, 70 targets. You're asking a lot, but he is in play.
Yeah, it's a best ball play, to your point. Like, he's should clearly be behind the other 3 top options. So it's hard to get overly excited, but in best ball, you're in a good offense. Like, he can come through, with the touchdowns. I think you nailed it. Like, that's how Hayden Hurst outproduces his ADP. But to your point, you're going to really struggle. And think of CJ Uzomah last year, like, had a few blow up games for us, and like DFS, so people that threw that dart on Uzomah those weeks in DFS, as a men tight end, like they came through really big. And so that kind of upside is there. Hayden Hurst is a former late first round pick. But it's going to be kind of up and down. You're going to really struggle to want to have him in your lineup every week, or pull the trigger to put him in your lineup every week, in redraft. And if you're trying to pick from like him and two other similar players, like, you've probably been there, Ian. Like I picked the wrong damn one every time.
Cleveland Browns, your question obviously was, will Deshaun Watson play in 2022? We now know that he will. You guys can tune into Dwayne's and I entire podcast about the topic if you want more information on that. Only things I will add out of training camp, Anthony Schwartz banged up his knee. Apparently just strained though, so not looking like going to be a fully long-term thing. He looked like Anthony Schwartz is one of these guys where I don't think he himself is going to carve out like usable fantasy value, but if he is rotating with Donovan Peoples-Jones and David Bell, and now we just have this big committee across from Amari Cooper, that could prevent either of those other guys really standing out. Also note that David Bell remains on the PUP with a foot injury that he suffered in minicamp, getting a little bit of a Donovan Peoples-Jones hype out there. But again, you can tune into our Deshaun Watson specific podcast for a full breakdown on the Cleveland Browns offense. Dwayne, with the Broncos, it's your boy. It's that season. No, not Albert O. You're more concerned about Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. How dare you, Dwayne?
Yeah. And honestly, I was torn, but I went with the one I knew that would make a bigger difference, like to most people playing fantasy.
Fair,
right.
Fair.
In most leagues now, with where the ADP is at on Albert O, you're probably just going to be able to ring him up as a free agent on week one. For most, if you're in a deeper league, yeah, he goes in like round 12, 13, 14. People are still taking him in a tight end premium, but everybody's got to face the reality of what's the deal with Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon, the third. So I don't know how much information we'll get on this. We've kind of gotten mixed reviews back to minicamp. We've heard some rumors that, well, it's going to be Williams. He's going to be taking, he has a really good shot. People inside the building think that, this could be 65% Javonte Williams, which we would all love because he smashes everything we want. His underlying data profile really looks more like a Jonathan Taylor, right? It looks like someone that we definitely would want to see on the field all the time. Having said all that, Melvin Gordon was also really good last year. Now they waited, basically let him go shop the market, brought him back on a 1 year, $2.5 million deal. But you are hearing, in camp. And again, this is to your point. It's where it's tough. Like practice reps are so tough. We don't know what the coaches are trying to establish. Sometimes it's just keeping people fresh. Right. Sometimes, depending on if they're facing the first string defense, they may actually be simulating, what a first drive might look like. And maybe that would matter more if Williams was out there, or if they rotated on that drive, we might care more about that. So it's tough to decipher all this. So, and again, I don't know what they're going to do in preseason games, right? Are they going to give these guys many carries? Hopefully we get one game where we can kind of see, but even then it's going to be a limited data point. So it's one of these things where I think we're going to have to try to pick up what's the drum beat, right? Like a Sigmund Bloom would say, can we find a consistent pattern that we're hearing through this, or is it just kind of all over the place every day?
I think it's been a fairly consistent drumbeat that Javonte will be featured a little bit more. The 65-35 thing is maybe a little bit wishful thinking. Like I'm thinking more 55-45 or 60-40. We did get the note that, Hackett won't comp. Every time you ask Nathaniel Hackett, they're thrilled to have both running backs out there. Of course, he's going to be saying that. They did put Javonte out there, though, first 2 straight days of practice to start things off. So hopefully that's a sign. But to your point, Dwayne, who the hell knows with some of these rotations, what they're actually trying to do. In Denver, though, obviously that is big news. We mentioned the Tim Patrick leg injury, still awaiting word. Last tweet we saw was that he will be having an MRI, and there is fear, per sources, that both are significant for Tim Patrick and backup running back DeMar. Not good for Tim Patrick, not good for freaking anybody. We've talked about these Broncos wide receivers all offseason long. On the other side of things, Dwayne, KJ Hamler activated off the PUP list, already out there practicing, someone that his knee injury, because he suffered it in August, or maybe it was early September, we weren't as concerned about the timeline with that. It was more so the dislocated hip that was on top of the knee issue that was really cause for concern. Man. So first of all, if Tim Patrick's out of the picture, I have no choice but to be a lot higher on Jerry Jeudy, because my primary concern with Jerry Jeudy is now completely out of the picture. I'm sure plenty of you Jeudy believers will say that I always should have believed in Jerry Jeudy and that Tim Patrick was never going to be a problem. But whatever, Dwayne, we got here.
But to be fair to you, Ian, your argument was I think you've been pretty balanced in your Jeudy argument. Like, look, we've seen some things because I've argued the other side of it. And at the end of the day, like we've seen a few things from Jeudy and he's played injured. So you haven't completely dismissed him, but you bring up a good point. I mean, Tim Patrick has essentially been close to what Judy's been, and so why would we just automatically heap everything onto Jeudy? But yeah, I think at this point, if the injury is serious for Tim Patrick, still hoping that it's not, but it doesn't sound promising the way the team responded. We've got the MRI, results still coming. But yeah, absolutely. Because our big concern with Jeudy was that he might be limited in the number of routes that he saw. Because if he got stuck inside in the slot and, Timmy Pats, if he was playing outside all the time and they're in 12 personnel, so 2 tight ends, or maybe they run a fullback out there on those formations, we were just worried that you're not going to have Jerry Jeudy on the field. That means we could have seen a player locked below 70%, and routes run per drop back. And the other factor being is that KJ Hamler really profiles as a slot guy. So then is he rotating in? Oh yeah, Greg Dulcich, the rookie tight end, really profiles as not an inline tight end, a slot player. So there was a lot of risk baked into Jerry Jeudy because of maybe not just forget the talent, but like, could he be on the field? Like, is he going to be on the field enough? And so now to your point, I think honestly, Jeudy probably has to be out there if Patrick is out. In the 2 wide sets, that gives Hamler a freer run to handle those slot reps. And we've seen what Russell Wilson can do with some of these speedy receivers that run those crossing routes and get, those deep crossers, get over top the linebackers, hit that back corner past, past the safeties or get over top the safeties. We've seen it with Tyler Lockett. Not that we're saying that Hamler's going to be Tyler Lockett, but it's a similar archetype of player, a guy that's with blazing speed, and we know what Russ likes to do. So I think if we do find out that, Patrick is out, like this is I think this definitely moves the needle up on both of those players. I think I'll probably stay about the same on where I'm at with Sutton, just because we still have these other guys like Albert O. We've got the running backs that can still be involved. I think it's tough to push Sutton up much more than where he's at. And in fact, if ADP keeps climbing, at some point we may have to jump off the Sutton train.
So I had Jeudy wide receiver 29 before any of this happened. Dwain, right now, I think it'd be really tough to rank him any lower than 25th. I see the Deontay, Waddle, Gabe Davis, Allen Robinson tier, and I'm tempted to move him right there at the top of that up to wide receiver 21. So I'm thinking just straight up low end, maybe borderline wide receiver 2 range. That sound about right? Or are you going to go a step further? Okay.
Nope. I think that's for his profile. If we know that he's going to have the snaps, I think that's where you slot him. So it's a matter of just what happens to how much does his ADP climb? And can we continue to gain access? But he's a player that's young enough, right? And we know that the talent profile is at least solid. So even if you have to reach a little bit on him to gain some exposure, I probably will. If you're drafting in one league, you only have one draft. Judy's not a guy I'm going to go out of my way, to reach for. But look, I love a receiver, getting to play with Russell Wilson. Like that's the bottom line. So he's a guy that certainly will be in fantasy plans. But I think that where you just discussed, having him, I think, as that low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3, that's where he deserves to slot in.
Where are you moving Hamler up to? I mean, you could argue just swap him out with Tim Patrick. That's probably a little aggressive, but at a minimum, man, I think once we get into that early wide receiver 60 range where we have the Patriots guys and Jalen Tolbert and Joshua Palmer, to me, that seems like the spot that Hamler could definitely be going now.
Yeah, I think that's right. You could probably, you could make an argument. Does he belong, more like up in like the mid 50s, early 50s, like a Rondell Moore? You probably have Rondell Moore even a little bit higher than that. My guess
48, baby.
I figured you were late 40s. So we're close. I'm 52 on Rondell. That's the other spot where I'm kind of like, but like, do you want to take him over Jahan Dotson? I think Jahan Dotson right now profiles as the number 2 weapon in a lesser attack, right? Doesn't have as good of a quarterback, a lesser offense. You're getting the 3rd weapon, probably maybe 4th though, because Albert O could have something to say about it. So yeah, I think you're probably right. Slot him in, somewhere maybe around like Robbie Anderson, those types. And if you want to put him above that, that's fine because he's younger, right? And so there's still more unknowns with Hamler. He could still have a bigger breakout. We like Anderson, but we kind of know what he is at this point. So if you're more of a want to take a bigger swing type player, then I think Hamler probably fits just above those guys, which in my ranks would put him, somewhere around Jalen Tolbert, maybe right behind Jahan Dotson, maybe right ahead, so in my top 60.
Let's move on to the Houston Texans here. My guy, Cordero Patterson, is now going outside the top 36 running backs in all of fantasy, but he is not the cheapest starting running back in all of fantasy. That honor goes to whoever the hell winds up leading this Houston Texans backfield. That's what you want to get to the bottom of here, Dwain.
Yeah, it's just when we look at Dameon Pierce, and there's a challenge. We've talked about it. He never handled an every down role in college. He was a number 3 back, though, on PFF's big board, coming out of Florida after leading the FBS in rushing grade last year with a 93.5. His 25% tackles avoided per attempt is 2 percentage points above the NCAA average. And he's one of 4 backs, and you brought this up way early on in the process to post a 70-plus PFF grade in rushing, receiving, and pass blocking in the 2022 class. So he seems to be a well-rounded back. He has been limited in the nature that he's been used in college, but we've seen guys like this from Florida that had limited roles that were really talented players recruited highly coming to the NFL. And we're like, wow, what is this? Like Kadarius Toney is an example last year. He was kind of limited in the way that he was used at Florida. Not a running back, but it's a player that we definitely want to keep an eye on because the competition just isn't that stiff, with Marlon Mack and Rex Burkhead, those don't qualify as immovable obstacles, to gaining a large workload. But I think if we're looking for just one thing around Dameon Pierce, what I would love to hear, Ian, is that he's getting the passing down work because we're dealing with the Texans. They're not slated to win many games. They're probably going to trail often. So we don't necessarily want to be involved, even with young players, right, with backs that are going to handle just early down work on bad teams, because that just means you're not on the field. Like after the first half of the game, when things are out of reach, you're just not on the field anymore because your team's trailing all the time. And, once you get down inside the 5 later in the games, let's say you're making a comeback, a lot of times the coaches don't want to run the ball because they don't want to take more time off the clock with a run play. They want to just throw it in the end zone 3 or 4 times in a row. So those are the things that could work against Dameon Pierce if he's just the early down option. The plus is he profiles as someone that maybe could end up just being the guy that takes over the receiving down work, but he is a rookie. So that's the big thing that I want to look for with Dameon Pierce. Can we get any nuggets telling us that he might potentially be the lead pass down back, which is the hardest role to earn as a rookie? And then could he develop into more as the season goes and maybe steal some of those early down carries from a guy like Marlon Mack?
Only kind of note I saw on him was that him and Rex Burkhead apparently have been flashing the most amongst the Houston Texans running backs, but not a lot of notes out there on the Texans. I think they are probably happy to take a backseat in the media these days. Only other note I would say recently, I think we already touched on this in a separate podcast, but yeah, with 2nd round pick John Mechie likely out for the entire season as he battles leukemia. Nico Collins will be now stepping up really definitively as the number 2 in that offense. Davis Mills, 4 games, over 300 passing yards last year. It will be the Brandon Cook show more weeks than not, but Nico going still usually outside the top 70 wide receivers. You could do worse in that range. Let's talk a little about the Indianapolis Colts here, Dwain. Matt Ryan under center. That no good Carson Wentz is gone, and I'm not saying that myself. I'm trying to imitate Colts brass here because that's kind of been the buzz the entire summer. But you know what, man? Reggie Wayne, wasn't it him that said that Matt Ryan reminded him of Peyton so much that he started crying or something? So hey, there's a lot of people excited about it, and for good reason. Matt Ryan has led some fantastic offenses over the years, but Dwain, you're wondering how much is it going to be Matt Ryan stepping into the Colts offense, and maybe how much the Colts offense becomes what Matt Ryan wants to do.
Right. So the big buzz out of camp, and again, it's early, but it's just been how quickly Ryan's moving the offense, and so when you look at last season, the Colts only averaged 2 plays per minute, which was the 2nd slowest in the NFL. We also have talked about multiple times the way game scripts really worked out perfectly for the running game for the Colts, because they, when you look at their leading scripts where they led by at least 4 points or more, they were 13% above the NFL average. So just regression alone on that statistic and potentially a faster offense would mean maybe there's more opportunity even than we think here for a guy like Michael Pittman Jr., right, who we clearly expect to lead this team. We're also getting buzz around Paris Campbell saying that he's probably, it's due this time. And look, Campbell is a great athlete and he can play in the slot. He's a guy that you can work underneath. Pittman, you can work outside, really use him. They'd be nice complements, to one another. So I think there's a lot of implications, for Matt Ryan if they can move the ball more quickly. And when I say implications really for the Colts, receivers. And it also could potentially impact Jonathan Taylor, because Jonathan Taylor, we've also heard the buzz in camp that Nyheim Hines, he's going to have more of a role. We saw them use Nyheim Hines even more last year out wide in the slot to try to help offset, the fact of, well, we don't just want to take, Jonathan Taylor off the field all the time when we have Nyheim Hines out there. But Hines was really the 2-minute offense back. Now, Jonathan Taylor started to take over a little bit more of the passing duties late last year. But if the Colts are suddenly playing a quicker brand of football, they're not leading by as much. I think there is some potential impact to Jonathan Taylor's role here and how many touches he's going to get that really help a lot of the other players, namely Pittman, Campbell, as well as Nyheim Hines.
Dwayne, do you see the news?
No. What's the news?
Big news. Big news.
Okay, I got to look at Twitter.
Look at Rap Sheet.
Oh, my God.
Yep.
Do we need to stop and do an emergency pod on Herndon?
Probably. Chris Herndon on the Saints, baby. Oh, my God. I'm so excited. I'm not sure if he's going to make the team, but back in the NFL, life is good on Chris Herndon. I didn't hear one thing about him the entire offseason. Dwayne, I told you, man, I literally went to go search and see what his free agency cycle was doing, what was going on. And the first news thing I saw was someone quoting a tweet I had asked about like that topic like a couple weeks before. So finally, one of the key free agency pieces.
It's setting up for you, man. Auden Tate can be a starter this year. We already got CPAT back last year. Can we Duke Johnson, at least he's on a team. At least he's on a team, that, could potentially give him some run.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
I'm
waiting for you to hit like the trifecta, on these guys all at one time.
Back on topic. Apology. I'm not sorry. I'm hyped. You guys all know Chris Herndon's my guy. We only get a few of these a year. Back to the Colts. I will say this, Dwayne. You look at the Colts and the Cowboys. I look at Nyheim Hines and Tony Pollard a little bit similarly. I don't think Hines has the same ability to be the full-time workhorse as Pollard does should an injury happen, but we're getting the same usual July, August. This running back's to get some more run in the slot. The same BS we hear every year, and we know it's not going to happen. But my God, Dwayne, Pollard and Hines, I do think they are two of very few running backs that actually are capable of kind of doing that and being a threat as a receiver. And you look at those wide receiver rooms, particularly the Cowboys with the injuries they're suffering. My God, if there were two offenses that it would make sense to really use their RB2 more so in that fashion, it would be the Colts and it would be the Cowboys with Nyheim Hines and Tony Pollard. It's probably just wishful thinking, but damn it, Dwayne, you can imagine. I just don't know how Hines
I think they're different.
Them.
I think Hines really is he's basically a receiver. I think he and J.D. McKissick are basically receivers. Then you have CMC, the Kamara tier, which are like just a notch below those guys as far as like put them out on a cornerback, right? They can still do something, but they're great mismatches versus linebackers and safeties. My challenge with Pollard is he's not really this plus ADOT player. He's not necessarily like a great route runner. He's good, but he's not wide receiver good. And yeah, you could get him out there and scheme him things, but I think the best way to get Pollard more touches is just let him take over the passing down work from Zeke. Then you immediately get a cushion from linebackers, safeties. You can get him into space. You can create layers to your field. You have Tolbert running down the field. Then you can have CeeDee Lamb working the short to intermediate stuff. And then you have, Pollard working underneath, and you got Schultz playing, as a great matchup inside against the zone type stuff. So I struggle to see, and I've been through this so many times, right? To your point, we hear it every year. We heard it with Kareem Hunt 2 years ago. We heard it with Darrell Henderson, his rookie season, how he was going to play in the slot and do all these things and be on the field at the same time as Todd Gurley. And then, now hearing it, again this year. And I think it takes a special profile for a player to get that kind of role, because typically from an X's and O's standpoint, and this, Ian, like if you're thinking it's a potential run play and you've got Pollard on the field, that's not a plus. He's not a good blocker. If you're thinking it's a passing play and you want to have Pollard and Zeke on the field, that's not necessarily a plus either, because Zeke's not really that great of a weapon. He's fine as a check down type player, and he's better maybe than what people think in the receiving game, but he's not something that threatens the defense. So I just struggle, and I feel like, and I know we'll talk probably Pollard on the NFC, but for me with Hines, he is a little different. So maybe, and when we've actually seen them increase his slot reps, the last couple of years. He was like almost at 130 last year. So we'll see what they do. But to your point, typically these things don't come. Typically, I don't know of a time these things have come to fruition, to be honest. Like I can't think of a time where all of a sudden a running back started playing slot all the time and we got all this production out of him being on the field the same time as the other back.
It's just, I hear you. the hit rate is so small in this. I feel like we should just completely disregard it. But
it would make sense to your point, though. Like the weapons they need.
It's more so the Cowboys. Like, I'm not sitting here doing the same. Oh, the Cowboys need to bench Zeke for Tony Pollard. We know that's not going to happen. But will the Cowboys play Noah Brown, Jake Ferguson, and these guys that we don't even know? Will they play those guys over Tony Pollard instead of putting him out there in the slot, in the backfield, getting more creative with it? Because at that point, I understand the Cowboys believe Zeke is better than Tony Pollard. I'm not sure the Cowboys believe Zeke, their wide receiver 3, their tight end 2. I don't know about those other guys if they consider them better than Pollard. In Nyheim Hines' case, with Alec Pierce there, with Paris Campbell, with Michael Pittman, as long as those guys are healthy, I don't see him having quite the same opportunities. So not a 1-for-1, but I want to get that idea off my chest.
But you also get Nyheim Hines way later. Now Pollard's clearly got the better upside. To your point, like if Jonathan Taylor goes down, basically the Colts would need to change their offense, right, for Nyheim Hines to have any kind of chance to really give you upside. They'd probably need to turn into like a pass-heavy team. I don't know if they would do that. I mean, maybe they would. It's not like they have a super deep running back room. Whereas if Zeke goes down, I mean, Pollard has RB1 overall potential. So and that's what you're paying for. That's my challenge with Pollard, though, is you got to take him in round 7, right now drafts, when you can turn around and you can grab a Chase Edmonds in round 8, Kareem Hunt, in round 8, other guys that profile very similar, really good passing down backs, but have clearer paths, to, potentially, better roles anyway than what Pollard has. So that's my biggest challenge. It's like, I love Pollard and I want to have access to Pollard in drafts. It's the ADP thing that it makes it kind of tough. Like, he's going at the end of round 6 right now over at the FFPC.
He did have over 1,000 yards last year with 17 games of Zeke. Now, I know they cut Zeke's usage back, but I think the guys you brought up are very reasonable. But Pollard, like, I would not group him in with like the Alexander Madisons of the world. Like,
I agree with that. He's
far more.
Even though Pollard did those things, like, still listen to his fantasy points. 8, he had a 23, 7.5, 6, 7, a 14, a 9, a 4, a 5, a 16, a 9, a 10, a 15, a 12, a 7, a 9. So I mean, it's fine. But honestly, if you have Pollard, this is what I'll say: you want him in your RB2 spot. Don't take. I'm not taking Pollard if I've already got 3 backs or if I've already got 2 backs. If I want to take him and say, fine, I'll live with him in my RB2, and I've got him loaded at receiver, I'm loaded at these other spots, which he makes it hard to do because you got to take him in round 7. That's the appeal of waiting till round 8 or 9 on a couple of these other guys with similar profiles. You can you can get the elite quarterback, you can get the elite tight end, you can have it all if you're not stuck on Pollard. But at the end of the day, if you have him as your RB2 and everything else you have is strong, then I like it for Pollard. And then you come back and you hammer some of the other stuff at running back. Maybe you can still, to your point, add like a CPAT who's fallen down the boards. And then maybe CPAT actually steps into your RB2 role for you. And then if Pollard goes off later, great. So there's ways you can build your roster to get Tony Pollard in. But I think you definitely need to be planning multiple steps ahead, because you do have to sacrifice ultimately the best way, I think, this year to build a roster. Pollard makes you get off of that plan just a tad. Not saying it can't work, because it could, but you need to plan for it.
Jacksonville Jaguars, who of course took down the Colts. I was going to skip this quick rant, but it's about the Jaguars. It's the Jaguars and the Colts, so it just actually lines up pretty perfect. Let's hype up Matt Ryan and Paris Campbell and just leave Wentz out of it. He's been off the team for like 5 months now. We still have guys tweeting. This happened on, July 28th. Paris Campbell with an accurate QB hitting him in stride is a lethal combination. Like, did the beat writers not even watch that Week 18 game? Like, is that what we're going to here? Because like, Paris Campbell dropped a perfectly thrown bomb from Carson Wentz on 4th and freaking season in that 4th quarter. So like, look, man, I love Paris Campbell. It takes a lot for me to point out a negative about, an Ohio State guy, Dwain. So I'm, as I'm patting myself on the back here, like, come on, though.
I'm proud of you.
Just tell me that Matt Ryan and Paris Campbell look great. Like, just spare me these still jibes, these little daggers we're still throwing Carson Wentz's way this long after the fact. So with that off my chest, Dwain, the Jacksonville Jaguars, star of training camp so far, one Travis Etienne. Now we do have James Robinson somehow already off the PUP list. Looking like, it's tough to know exactly what every single team's, standing is on guys not on the PUP, whether they're guaranteed to play week 1 or whether they're still a candidate to be eased back into action, or maybe they will go back on the PUP eventually. Either way, Dwain, the big thing for Etienne, I think this is what a lot of people don't realize. Whether Robinson's there or not, man, it does change his ceiling outcome, obviously, but more than anything, let's just get the guy some targets.
Yeah, and that's really all we care about. Do we know for sure that Travis Etienne is locked into the passing down role? Because if he is, you're still getting a value in round 3 of sharp drafts, and you can get him in round 4 or 5 of your home leagues right now. So you're still getting value because you're getting a player, an archetype that's basically, and you've nailed it earlier in the season with your comp. It's DeAndre Swift. You're getting DeAndre Swift, the same as what we were dealing with last year. Folks worried about the 1A, 1B thing, right? With Jamal Williams and with Swift. We've been worried about the 1A-B thing with Eckler and Melvin Gordon in the past. We've always worried about the 1A, 1B. Well, if you're the 1A, meaning if you're the 1B, but it means you get the receiving down work, especially on a team that's, expected to lose a lot of games, you're probably going to have the most valuable, opportunities on the team. We also know that Etienne can be an explosive player, so he gives the opportunity to break the big plays. That helps him overcome the fact that he may not see as much carries inside the 5. So there's just so many things to like about Etienne, but we do need to make sure that he does have that passing down role, because I've even heard from a couple of beat writers, and you might have something on this, Ian, where somebody's saying, well, maybe it's, Robinson that's going to be the passing down work. Like, that would floor me. With everything I've heard about the way they're working on Etienne in the passing game, how he's the star of camp, how you just can't deal with him out in the flat or anything like that, against these linebackers like that really surprised me, so I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it's worth noting. We need to know if for some reason we thought Etienne was not getting the passing down work, that would be bad. That would be really bad for him. 2-minute offense and long down and distance are they're very different, actually. Long down and distance, usually the running back will stay in to block because what happens on 3rd and long? Ian, they go man coverage, and what does the defense do? They blitz, right? So typically the back has to stay in. But in a 2-minute offense, which is what we care about the most, right? That means you're in catch-up mode. You're just trying to move the ball down the field. If that means a check down to your back, if it means getting the back, more involved, on angle Texas routes, Ian, things like that, which Etienne, he was the number 1 PFF receiving grade, 90.9 in the country in his final year at Clemson. And we're getting all the buzz around his role as a receiver. But again, we need to make sure that he is going to have that passing down role. If for some reason we thought that was really in jeopardy, that would mean I would need to take a break tap on Travis Etienne.
Really helpful article on ESPN.com where they basically just were asking some of the biggest fantasy football questions, and they each had a beat reporter from every team go through. So Michael DeRocco for the Jaguars asked, how does the mix of Travis Etienne and James Robinson work? Michael said the following: Robinson is recovering from a torn Achilles, but the team didn't place him on the PUP, and the hope is he'll be fully cleared in mid-August. Head coach Doug Peterson said in the spring that the team still views Robinson as a top back. However, Etienne will be heavily involved in the passing game. Offensive coordinator Prez Taylor said he can see Etienne being used similar to the way Philadelphia used Brian Westbrook years ago. That'd be freaking awesome. Educated guess from Michael: Robinson has more carries than Etienne, but Etienne could have a slight lead in total touches by the time the season ends. Music to our ears there. That's exactly what we're hoping for. Or, Dwayne, Robinson is slow coming back and Etienne takes over the whole damn backfield. Like, I don't see the Kamara, Deebo Samuel comps for Etienne here. The comp would be Christian McCaffrey in that point, because the man's not leaving the damn field. Like, that really at its just is what Christian McCaffrey can bring.
Either way, you're getting upside from his ADP right now, assuming he has the passing down role, which I'm still 90% that's Etienne's.
Yeah.
I've just heard a little bit to make me be like, okay, let's monitor it. But even if James Robinson gets a lot of the early down work, you're still getting a value as, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round of drafts. If, to your point, James Robinson is not ready, or Etienne is just really good, and they've got a 1st-round draft pick in this guy, you still got the same front office there. I know we've got a new coach, but if that's the situation, that's the scenario, the upside, to your point, people aren't even thinking necessarily of what Etienne's real upside could be if he gets all the work. So I like the new stuff coming out around Etienne. Oh, well, we've got James. It's really already baked into his ADP. So if this is going to make people let Etienne fall further down draft boards, it's really just good for all of us.
Kansas City Chiefs. We know Mahomes is going to put up big time numbers. We know Travis Kelce is going to put up big time numbers. We don't know what the pecking order is at wide receiver. Little bit of uncertainty going around here with this specific question, Dwain, because amidst Skyy Moore basically flashing day after day. I mean, again, just training camp highlights, and you do have to get past seeing, a guy wearing number 24 going downfield, but objectively making some good plays out there. Not that we're overly concerned with that, Dwain, but we did see him come up gimpy in practice as we record this on August 2nd. I think it's Tuesday, something around there. But Dwain, the question is, how early is too early for Skyy Moore? We had one beat reporter saying that he viewed Skyy Moore as a 2023 pick. He's not thinking that's the case anymore. And not a pick necessarily, but, like a 2023 contributor. That's what you're most concerned with finding out.
Yeah, I think we just need to know. All I want to know is, can Skyy Moore be out there in the starting 3 wide receiver sets, which in my mind means he just needs to beat out McCole Hardman, who's really struggled to earn any kind of full-time role anyway. Look, MVS is going to be out there on the opposite side. They paid him. Will he be able to earn targets? Different question. Juju Smith-Schuster probably going to be out there in the slot, but who's going to be the third receiver? And I think if it is Skyy Moore, I think there's potential that he's the number 2 target in this offense. And the reason why is, a lot of people discount Skyy Moore. And I think we're hearing, and again, this can be confirming priors, right? We hear a lot about rookies through camp reports, but just a lot of comments, right, around the route running, and him and Patrick Mahomes getting on the same page. And when you look at Moore, what I really like is, of the routes that the NFL uses the most, the staple routes, 60% of NFL routes, so you had to qualify, you had to, at least over the last 3 years, a route had to count for at least 7% of the routes used by the NFL. So once you take that as your cutoff, and then you apply that to all the receivers that were coming out in college this year and looked at their careers, Skyy Moore had the number 1 yards per route run across all of those. Now, is that like some defining thing that means, oh my God, Skyy Moore is for sure to smash? We don't have data going back far enough, honestly, to tell us whether or not that's going to be something that's predictive or super important. But it made me take note, right? Because a lot of people immediately dismiss Skyy Moore because he comes from a small school. And what do people equate small schools with? Not going to be ready for the big time. So at least against the competition he played against, Skyy Moore proved to be really good on the things that the NFL likes to do. And when you think about what we have with the Chiefs, MVS probably going to be stretching the field out more. Juju more of an underneath guy. Kelce can do everything. But then, I think Moore is the guy that gives you probably the next most versatility in all the different things that he can do, right? And really the timing routes and different things like that we haven't seen as much from, in this offense. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity because MVS hasn't really shown us anything as far as a breakout. Yes, he did get paid, but he would be an outlier based on the data I use if MVS broke out. Juju Smith-Schuster, you've documented it. You said it multiple times. What's he been really on all of his underlying metrics since his breakout season? Not much, and people want to blame Ben, when you look at Deontay Johnson and you're like, well, it didn't bother Deontay Johnson. Didn't really bother Chase Claypool, but it really bothered Juju Smith-Schuster. So, I mean, yeah, is Ben a factor in some of those things for Juju? Yeah, but also his PFF receiving grade wasn't very good, which is designed to help separate those things apart. So I think there's just a really good opportunity if we know that Moore's going to be out there, Ian, in 3 wide receiver sets. I would not be surprised if he ends up being the number 2 targeted player behind Travis Kelce in this offense, and we can get him in a sharper draft going round 9. When I say sharper, mainly just leagues that have already been drafting. If you're in a high stakes league or you're playing on underdog, these people have been drafting for months now, right? And so they're just, drafting takes practice. But if you're in a home league and these ADPs haven't caught up yet, like Skyy Moore, man, like round 12, round 13, you're getting this guy maybe with one of your last picks.
Also would note that Isaiah Pacheco, there's, I believe, 7th round rookie running back, getting a little bit of hype as well. I found a good note from JJ Zachariason, friend of the podcast. He was on earlier this offseason, obviously at late round QB, true legend of the industry. But in his draft guide, which was fantastic, you can still purchase that, he noted the following about Pacheco. Before this year's draft and since 2011, only Leonard Fournette, Derrick Henry, Robert Turbin, nice, A.J. Dillon, and Jonathan Taylor have been selected in the draft while having captured a speed score of 115 or better and a best season touchdown share of 35% or better. In other words, they moved incredibly fast for their size, and they did well in the touchdown column in college. This year, Breece Hall joined that group. So did Isaiah Pacheco. So no, I'm not expecting him to beat out Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Hell, he still might not even make the team, even though we've had a couple people say nice things about him in these training camp reports. But you could do worse, in the 5th round of a rookie draft if you still have those coming up. Also, would just say in the wide receiver room, mentioned this briefly before, but yes, Justin Ross done for the season. Hopefully he can be back in 2023 healthy for the first time in a minute. Dwain, another backfield that we got some questions about, the Las Vegas Raiders. People, I think, need to look at the Raiders as we looked at the Patriots. And the best way of doing that is admitting that we know nothing, but maybe we do know something, Dwain. That is the question, though. What do we need to tweet the Raiders like that? Or has that been a Bill Belichick thing? And Josh McDaniels is now going to give us just the most clear-cut, defined backfield that we could ever hope for. I tend to think probably more of a Patriots thing.
Yeah, I lean that way as well. And again, a lot of times we will dismiss, coaching tendencies, historical coaching tendencies, because there's a lot of context, right? You go back and you look at a team and you'll see like, oh man, he's targeted this coordinator targeted his tight ends 25%. And you go back like, well, he had freaking Tony Gonzalez. No shit. And then the next stop he had freaking, whoever, Antonio Gates on his roster. Wow. It's amazing that 5 years in a row, this coordinator targeted, his tight end. So these things can be, taken with a grain of salt, but there are certain situations and scenarios where we've just seen long track records, Ian, and that's one that we have here. And then the Raiders backed it up with the offseason moves. That's even more important to me, right? When you get, okay, Josh McDaniels used to deploying 3-headed backfield. Josh McDaniels goes out, drafts Zamir White in the 4th round of the NFL draft. They also bring Brandon Bolden, special teamer, over. And I know, look, Brandon Bolden is a name that normally we would not even mention, Ian, right?
Only 2 teams in the NFL we care about Brandon Bolden on. This is one of them.
Yeah, the Patriots and the Raiders. And it's because we've seen the Patriots in the past, no matter what, Ian, basically, just always keep a third back involved. It doesn't matter how many guys get hurt. It just very rarely is condensed down to just 2 guys, so that makes it challenging to just look past it. And then when you add together the fact that we've got these moves, my gut says you're going to get Josh Jacobs going to play the Damian Harris role, which means no more 60% Josh Jacobs on the field, probably more like 40, maybe 50%. He'll probably get the first crack at all the carries inside the 5, but Zamir White could threaten him for some of those. I think in the passing game work, you're going to see Kenyon Drake out there. And if Kenyon Drake isn't well enough, I think that's why they added, a guy like Amir Abdullah. And again, Abdullah is another name that people probably wouldn't normally care about, including us. But on this team, he fits a very specific archetype that they like. They want to make sure they've got 2 guys that can catch the ball, 2 guys that can bang, inside the tackles. You could also look at Kenyon Drake as almost being more that jack of all trades type player, more like a Rex Burkhead type, right? So yeah, I think this is a challenge for the Raiders. I think it's a challenge to really consider Josh Jacobs, to be honest, at ADP. It's one of those things where I'm treating it more like the Patriots. Like, just give me the back that goes the latest for the Raiders, and we'll just see what happens.
And it's been, we talk about constant drum beats. That's what this has been. Vic Tafur over at The Athletic wrote in June that he expecting the Raiders to shift from Josh Jacobs to a running back by committee system. We had Yahoo Sports' Charles Robinson report in July that he expects new coach Josh McDaniels to use a quote-unquote situational committee. And lo and behold, Tashawn Reed with The Athletic also reports that Kenyon Drake is expected to maintain a quote-unquote significant role in the backfield. Know that he's practicing and looks good, looks fully recovered from the broken ankle from last season. And yeah, specifically, Reed wrote, the Raiders will have more of a running back by committee approach this season, and Drake will play a significant role in the rotation as a runner and a receiver. He's going to a contract year, but next offseason isn't where his focus is. Also, Zamir White missed the first few days of camp with an undisclosed injury, but he is back and also apparently impressed. So I think the answer here, Dwain, is either what you said, take the cheapest one, or no, stay the hell away. If anything, we want the pass catcher. Like, Kenyon Drake is the only one I think I'm throwing a dart at. And that's what we talked about in New England. Damon Harris, people will say that he scored 15 touchdowns last year. He sure did. And he finished as the RB 18 in PPR points per game. Like LeGarrette Blount, we were chasing the LeGarrette Blount year. He wasn't even a top 15 running back in PPR points per game because full PPR is stupid scoring, but it's the game we play. So we got to deal with it. Also, would just note that Mac Hollins apparently standing out as the wide receiver 3. quote unquote early start of training camp. I think this offense is going to use plenty of 2 tight end stuff, though. Not going to have. And even if Mac Hollins gets that job, I just think he'll still be rotating with a couple guys. So we have Devontae, Renfro, Waller. That's where the targets are going.
And super deep leagues, Ian, that are like, especially if it's tight end premium, that kind of thing. You know how we've been willing to spend like that last round pick on Trey McBride, just see what happens. I think maybe Foster Moreau, depending on how you've built your team, maybe that's a name that we should consider down there, just because we know they're going to use that formation more. It just makes sense. And then number 2, if something does happen to Darren Waller, Moreau has at least flashed a little bit. Now, last year he lost a little bit of his shine, because we did get to see him for a little bit more of an extended stretch with Waller hurt. He didn't quite come through like we had seen him, in some of the smaller sample sizes before. But just a name to keep in mind, especially if you're playing a tight end premium draft. You're in round 20 and you're like, wow, I hate my tight ends. Let's just see what happens in the preseason. Foster Moreau's a name just to throw in your back pocket.
Dude, people were taking that Cowboys line he had after Waller was out. He went, no, okay, this is what happened. Yeah, against the Eagles, he had that spot start. He had the 6 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown. And then when Waller got hurt again, like people were trying to rank Moreau as this like top 5 or 6 tight end. I swear that actually happened, Dwayne. I don't think I'm strong.
It did happen.
Yeah,
it did happen.
But he went through, and yeah, he disappointed, but he still had a 7 catch, 65-yard gain, 4 catch, 67-yard gain. No, he wouldn't be Darren Waller if Darren Waller gets hurt. Still someone, especially in tight end premium, though, that could certainly earn his way into your starting lineup. Let's talk a little bit Los Angeles Chargers, Dwayne. Someone that you've been, really high on throughout this offseason, ahead of the curve, is one rookie, Isaiah Spiller. You're hoping that we have a little more clarity behind Austin Eckler by the time week 1 gets here.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're going to get it because we get like a new report every day. What I will say is early in training camp like this, again, practice reports, I'm not as concerned about. We're monitoring it, right? We're definitely keeping an eye on it, but these kind of reports really need to turn into more of that drumbeat theme to matter, because a lot of times coaches will just, put the other guys out there, right? Because they want to give a rookie the business. You know what I mean? Like, show them you're going to have to earn this role. But at the end of the day, Spiller profiles as a more complete back than what we have with Joshua Kelly or Larry Roundtree. They both have just not done anything special, this far in their career. Not saying that they, might not ever do something, but they were late round picks. And the Chargers did spend a round 4 pick after Isaiah Spiller just really struggled, at the NFL Combine. Ran a poor 40 time, then at his pro day, he did not have a good vertical leap, didn't have a good broad jump. So all the things that I know that the NFL brass love, and we care about too. We want explosive running backs. But at the end of the day, in round 4, you're getting a high production college profile, right? This is a player that played in the passing game. It's a player that played in the running game, the youngest running back coming out this year. And so I'm still willing to take a shot on Spiller as being the guy that's most likely to back up Austin Eckler. Could also carve out maybe 30% of the work, because we've been told that they don't want to overdo with Eckler. Eckler's even told us that himself, that he doesn't see himself being over a 50%, rushing attempt guy. That mean I'm paraphrasing there. That may not be his exact quote, but at the end of the day, we saw him see a season high last year in rushing attempts. We also saw him with a season high of carries inside the 5. So there's just some different paths here where Spiller could give you spike week value in best ball. I don't think he'll be someone we're comfortable starting like in a redraft league, even if he earns a little bit of a role. But because he carries the every down potential in a really good offense with the Chargers, that is a guy that it makes me want to prioritize him. But we do need to see, can he take the job? And so I'm really interested in seeing what happens in the preseason games here with Isaiah Spiller.
I'm not quite as high on Spiller as you and some of the other people are. I don't see the same pathway to standalone value. With that said, where he's going, I think he's perfectly fine as a handcuff there, because we saw what happened with Justin Jackson last year when Eckler went down, the way he was elevated and really took control. My issue is that before that happened, the Chargers clearly realized Justin Jackson was their one. That's why they treated him that way. It was still this muddled committee with, all 3 guys, seeing some work week to week before then. But hey, they aren't good. We've talked about the stats with, Roundtree and Kelly.
It's just where you're getting him. He has the chance to truly just be the main guy behind Eckler. And
at the price, it's fine. At the price, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. But if he is that guy, and we know they don't want to overuse Eckler, I think we could make as good of an argument just from a usage standpoint that Isaiah Spiller could see similar touches to Tony Pollard, right? If not more. Now, what we've seen from Pollard, right, is an elite profile, a player that's hyper explosive. So I'm not saying that Spiller is Pollard, but technically speaking, like there's a good chance that if he can't overcome those other two guys, like he could actually see more snaps than Pollard, because we've seen how the Cowboys are with Zeke, right? They could still want to have Zeke out there 65% of the time. Whereas with Eckler, at least we know like they're trying to limit it around that 50% spot, So again, that's where I think the spike week value can come in. Again, not a player you're going to feel really good starting in your lineup every single week. Most of his value, to your point, is going to come if you have an injury to Austin Eckler. Best ball will be the one case where maybe every once in a while, right, you might get, oh, wow, he scored, a touchdown and caught 5 balls, that kind of thing.
Final note here is just, again, with training camp, be really careful about putting too much stock in any one item because, hey, there's a lot of items going around. If you haven't seen them all, there's a good chance that you're weighing something more than needs to be weighed. So Daniel Popper does a great job at The Athletic. He came on this podcast last year, just breaking down all the practices. And he has talked about this being, Kelly one day, Spiller one day, Roundtree. They've all gotten reps with the ones. I mean, Brandon Staley said himself that until the pads come on, like he can't even evaluate the running backs. So, it's not a big deal right now. But Taylor Bisciotti works for NFL Network, and this is no offense to Taylor, but she comes out yesterday and she tweets that Isaiah Spiller has been taking first-team reps so far at camp. He is the only running back taking only first-team reps other than Austin Eckler, a promising sign he will be the RB2. Now, that got almost 3,000 or 2,600 likes. Taylor watches the rest of practice, comes back later, quote tweets herself, corrects it. Says during today's practice, Kelly and Roundtree also work with the ones. Undrafted running back Letty Brown, never heard that name before, had a touchdown. They're splitting reps and it's an open competition. RB2 is up for grabs. Dwayne, that had 60 likes. So we just have these situations where I think a lot of people confirming those priors. So again, nothing against Taylor. She was working with the information she had. Let's just not.
Hey, give her credit. She came back. Like a lot
exactly.
Of times nobody does. So
exactly. So between that and someone we'll get to in a bit, a certain Patriots RB2. Let's not let one drill and one practice completely change our entire opinion of a player. But everything Dwayne said about Isaiah Spiller still makes him a perfectly fine target where he's going, regardless of any practice updates from the last day or two. But Dwayne, another backfield we have some questions about. Mike McDaniel in Miami. What's his timeshare going to look like? Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Sony Michel. You got a lot of questions, Dwayne.
Yeah, I think at a minimum, we expect it to be a committee, right? But the question is, could Edmonds potentially be more of the 40 to 50% player, like what we saw with Elijah Mitchell last year? Maybe not quite as many of the rushing attempts, because when you go back and look at Mitchell in the games where he played at least 10% of the snaps, I want to say he was around 65% of the rushing attempts. I don't expect Edmonds to get anywhere close to that, but if he got to 40% of the rushing attempts and handle all the passing down work as an explosive playmaker, again, it's the archetype we're looking for, an explosive player who's very involved in the passing game. That just provides someone with outs, right? You can score touchdowns from long range. You hit the big plays. You also have an opportunity if you're in trailing game scripts, you're not sidelined, and you get to be out there for the high leverage opportunities, in the passing game, especially in PPR and half PPR formats. So we just want to kind of see if we can figure out. This one's going to be tough, Ian. I don't know that we'll be able to. My guess is we're going to see Edmonds with the starters if they use them in preseason, and they're going to come out for a series. And then they're going to see the backups come in, and we're going to find out who the two is, right? Is it Sony Michel? Is it Raheem Mostert? And at the end of the day, the next game, it'll be the opposite probably of that. It'll be Mostert over Michel. But look, here's the thing. I know with Miami, they went aggressively after Chase Edmonds. I know some people say that's still not a lot of money. It's pretty decent money for what running backs are getting right now in this market, right? All things being relative. So I'm putting a chip on the fact that they were aggressive after the player, and that we've seen him do the things we like, right, in the passing game and in the rushing game. So we'll see what it looks like. But as long as we think, it's not a situation where one of the other two is all of a sudden just the lead back, which I don't think is going to happen. It's just going to be really hard for Chase Edmonds to not pay off his ADP, in an offense that could look a lot different, with Mike McDaniel calling the plays.
Prime 0 RB target for those that are into that
Love
kind of thing. Final note here. Tweet from @Safid_Dean, NFL reporter. He noted that Dolphins tight end Mike Gesicki says he didn't even line up for a receiving snap during practice Saturday, yet he's ending practice catching balls from a jug machine. He's playing on the franchise tag this year and will have to block more than he has in Mike McDaniel's offense. Dwayne, I saw a lot of people being like, oh my God, I'm out on Mike Gesicki now. I actually kind of like this. If they're actually down to use him as a full-time inline tight end, that's the concern. We counted him as the odd man out in the slot. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. They paid Cedric Wilson. Hell, they brought in Muhammad freaking Sanu, and I'm sure there's another slot receiver somewhere in that offense I'm forgetting. Len Bowden, throw him in the freaking mix. Chase Edmonds. List goes on and on. With Gesicki, man, we just need him out there on the field. If he gets a 90% route rate in the slot or he gets a 90% route rate in line, I don't care. I think you could argue the end line route will get him more matchups against linebackers and safeties. Can he hold up as a blocker? Can he earn enough snaps there is a question. But to me, Dwayne, now Mike Gesicki is competing against Durham Smythe and freaking Adam Shaheen for inline targets. I kind of like his chances of winning that job versus Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in the slot. Am I weird for thinking that this might actually be a good thing?
I think it could be a good thing. Again, it's one of those things where we got incomplete information, though. Like, was that because they had him out there and they were just strictly running run plays and they're rotating all the guys through? Or is it because he was actually out there with the first team offense and they were letting him get run, blocking? Like, I would love to know, like, that context. That might be helpful. Again, still only a practice report, so we would have to monitor it, but definitely something that we can watch for in the preseason games, assuming that he gets to play. If they run him out there and, like, say, for example, like the biggest thing you could see from Mike Gesicki in a preseason game, Ian, would be they come out, they run 5 plays to start the game, all 5 rushing plays, and Mike Gesicki's out there for all of them.
That's
something
good.
like that. Like, that would be great for Gesicki, because our biggest challenge, to your point, has been, can he be on the field enough? Because the other 2 guys are actually pretty good run blockers. That makes me, that concerns me. They're probably better run blockers, but hey, maybe the guys improve. Maybe there's an opportunity there. But that's what we would need to see to move him up. So I think it's an astute observation by one Ian Hartitz.
New England Patriots. Here we go. The running back room. So, Dwayne, we adjust these ranks seemingly every day. Always get our updates in. Do you have Rhamondre Stevenson RB1 now, or is it a little early for that? RB3, RB4? What are you looking at in this Patriots backfield?
Well, I had him at RB1 overall. Then I dropped him to 3. Then I dropped him down to 41. Then I moved him back to RB8. So yeah, look,
rational right there.
Can Damian Harris and Rhamondre Stevenson finally condense this backfield in a 2-way committee? I think the easy answer is probably not. But it's at least worth asking, because both players have shown in their underlying data and metrics that they probably are pretty good running backs, right? So some of this, you got to look back at the history of the Patriots and you wonder how often did they really have 2 backs that were good enough, to challenge, each other for a lot of the carries. Typically, we've had more one's the receiving back, right? One's the jack of all trades, and then one's the early down work. Could we potentially see a situation where these 2 guys share that more? Or could Stevenson, with his work in the passing game, potentially, take over, maybe not all the early down work that still belongs to Harris, but maybe he usurps 2 roles, right? Like Burkhead and plus James White, because that's essentially what you need for him to pay off his ADP right now. And we would also need that because that would be a clear indicator that if for some reason something happened to Damian Harris, maybe we do have a more clear path to like maybe a 65% workload. Again, it's the Patriots. They're willing to sub in Dwain McFarland off of the freaking practice squad or off the damn waiver wire and let me play, freaking third downs. Why? I don't know, but they do it. So, and it's their way. It's been their way for a very long time. And it still doesn't, take away from the fact that Pierre Strong Jr. is a 4th round pick. Yes, I know, comes from a small school, but essentially the same draft capital as what they spent on Rhamondre Stevenson last year. And so I want to continue to track, are they using more of this Kyle Shanahan scheme? Are they using more of the wide zone? And I think the best way to look at it, Ian, is probably really tracking Pierre Strong Jr. and what folks are saying about him. If he's completely buried, and then we know James White is still trying to get back from this injury and he doesn't have a lot of, they don't have a lot of money tied up, in James White, then those could be things that can make us get a little bit more bullish on a player like Stevenson. Harris, maybe a little bit, but I feel like if there is a player to move up here, it still would be Stevenson, because the chance that maybe he has some of that pass, especially in PPR, right, that he might have a chance to get some of that passing down work. So definitely leaning towards, I don't think this is going to occur, but because of the backfield we have and the 2 backs that are available, we can't just assume 100%, right? Never going to happen. We need to follow the story.
I don't know, Dwayne. I'm hearing people saying Damian Harris get traded. That's how good Rhamondre Stevenson is. They're gonna trade Damian Harris. They're not gonna ask Stevenson to ever.
People do realize Damian Harris is actually good too, right?
That's the thing. Like, this dude just, Okay, I've seen the run Stevenson had against the Colts. That didn't even count. He breaks like 3 tackles, goes 30 yards. Great run. I've seen the 90-yard preseason touchdown against a bunch of plumbers. Like, what about Damon Harris dragging like 13 different Jets defenders into the end zone from like the 20-yard line? Like, that dude is a freaking dog, and so is Rhamondre Stevenson. But Hayden Winks, great point over underdog. Bill Belichick has always been an Alabama guy. Obviously, Mac Jones is an Alabama guy. Like, Damian Harris isn't going anywhere. So, yes, Dwayne, the question is, can we get a 2-back committee with Dame and Stevenson? Just Damian Harris isn't going away. And you can watch the freaking clips that Hayden pointed out in order in their position drills. It's still Damian Harris going first, Rhamondre Stevenson going second.
Post things like this.
It really is ridiculous. But I mean, hell, man, once again, though, like, just for us to have this idea that we know what the hell is going to go on in this Patriots backfield, like, what has given us that thought? You know, we're saying Pierre Strong's not going to have any run because he's a rookie and rookies don't get to work. Well, Stevenson did last year. So did we all just understand Stevenson was this sort of special talent that he was going to get that? Like, man, it's ridiculous. And we also got a report from Kerry Thompson, a Patriots beat reporter. Ty Montgomery has more juice than I remember. Just watched him get to the edge several times when the offense was repping their outside run concepts. He's going to see some real carries. I don't know if Ty Montgomery is actually going to see real carries, but to your point, Dwayne, I think there's going to be a third running back, and I'm not convinced that even if James White is on PUP, that's necessarily going to be fully open there for Stevenson. It could be Ty, it could be Pierre Strong, it could be JJ Taylor. Kevin Harris is another guy in that room. We just don't know. Be careful about being too certain about a backfield that, again, we have never been able to be certain about. Also, did you see the Stevenson lost 7 pounds, Dwayne?
Yeah, lost the water weight.
Dude, that's like first day of football practice. You go out there, you lose 7 freaking pounds. You got to write your weight down. You're really concerned.
I need a good day of football practice right now.
Yeah, seriously.
Cut off 7 pounds.
I see my weight jump up like 5-6 pounds. Like, I feel like once you're over 200 pounds, man, like your weight can just go up like that much and down by the day, seemingly. Or I'm just, incredibly unhealthy and need to watch my weight better. But last thing with the Patriots, Devontae Parker really flashing, looking like a dog. Just practice highlights. We'll see what happens. And I would guess that, Devontae Parker is the type of receiver that should be absolutely crushing it in practice and, making all these highlight reel plays. We'll see if he ultimately makes it out there with the starters, because Tyquan Thornton doing his thing too. And Kendrick Bourne's getting Deebo Samuel hype. And of course, Jacoby Myers is there as well, as we talked about in our Patriots preview, Dwayne. Very possible, I might add, that we ultimately see these wide receivers, a 4 or 5 player rotation that kind of results in all of them being rather meh fantasy assets.
The Patriots, more than any other team, I think, and some of this is due to the ambiguity because you can get these players late, but it's like everybody wants to put a stake in the ground, right? Yeah. Even though ADP is not suggesting it, right? They're all kind of close. But if you look at Twitter, it's very much like everybody's just going to have their Patriot take and run with it, right? Whether it's Parker, whether it's Jacoby Myers. I think the data still says Jacoby Myers is clearly the best option to have in the receiving game, and I'm going to stick with that. And there's enough good reports on, him as well. But like to your point, like the Kendrick Bourne, Deebo Samuel role, like it's just like whatever narrative you want to run with, you can find a tweet somewhere from a beat reporter to support it. And so back to your point, you have to be really careful and take in all the information, because at the end of the day, really, we have tweets about all these things, which means if they're all true, then aren't they all just going to take away from one another? So it's I'm fine with taking later swings on some of these players. Look, we've seen Devontae Parker have a big season. We've seen Devontae Parker dominate some of the best corners in the league for a season. The problem is he's never been able to be consistent, right? And he battles the injuries. So can he recapture that magic from 2000? Was it 19 or 18, Ian? I think it was 2019 where he really came out.
Post Juju. That's what we call 2019.
AD Juju. So instead of AD, it's post Juju. So AJJ.
We're gonna workshop that. We'll come back. All right, New York Jets, last AFC East squad. Wondering about this backfield, Dwayne. As awesome as Breece Hall's athletic profile is, he's not the only running back there. You're curious what's going to happen with one Michael Carter.
Yeah, so ultimately with Breece Hall, love the profile. I'm in on him. I'm in on him in round 4, round 5 of fantasy football drafts and redraft. That's where you can get him. Even in sharper leagues, you can get Breece Hall right now in round 4. So, he checks all the things we want from a college perspective, but at the end of the day, we have to always acknowledge that Michael Carter was really good as a receiving down back last year. And so the thing I'm looking at the most and trying to tease out from the reports, in the Jets backfield is who has the passing down work. Is it something where they're just going to rotate, and it's going to be, maybe Breece, because if they're rotating, my guess is Breece Hall probably gets, maybe 3 series. Michael Carter gets 1, right? Or maybe it's, 3.5 series to 1.5 series. And as long as they're both out there and they both get passing down work, Hall still gets carries inside the 5 and all those things. Breece Hall can pay off his ADP. What we don't want to see, back to the narrative we talked about earlier with Damian Pierce over in Houston, the Jets are not expected to win a lot of games. So if we were to catch wind that Breece Hall will not have the passing down role because it is Michael Carter's and he's going to run the 2-minute offense, he's going to handle all the long down and distance work, that would really hurt Breece Hall, because now, again, we're an early down back who's potentially going to be playing in trailing scripts. Now, he can still come through with some big plays. Maybe the Jets, there's other outs, right? Maybe the Jets take a step forward as an offense, but we've got questions around, Zach Wilson. So I think the easiest way to feel super confident, right, other than just his overall college profile for Breece Hall, is to just know, are we pretty sure, right, that he's got the passing down work, or at least that he's not going to be eliminated in the passing down work. I'm fine if Carter still gets some of it if it's a rotation, but man, like that would be the worst case scenario for Breece Hall, is all of a sudden he's just the early down option on this offense that we have a lot of questions about.
At a minimum, it does seem like it's shrunk down to 2 backs. Last year, this was really more of a 3-headed committee, with one of Tevin Coleman or Ty Johnson also factoring in. Still possible. Coleman's been on the NFI list to start camp. Carter actually didn't practice today with an ankle injury, although they've noted it's not too serious. Also got 3rd-round tight end Jeremy Ruckert on the PUP list. But yeah, man, Breece Hall is one of those guys where if Carter is healthy and we get, 12 first-team snaps and Breece Hall plays 10 or 11 of them, could be rising pretty fast, because where he's going right now, pretty much right there next to David Montgomery. Like, I just could see Breece Hall not that much good news away from leaping up kind of more in that James Conner kind of side of things. I think just outside the top 12 running back. So certainly still room to rise.
With Breece, man, one route. Honestly, even if we were to see in the first preseason game that Carter had the passing down role, but Breece Hall ripped off a long run, it wouldn't matter. Like, the ADP will skyrocket. Like, the guy will move potentially into like the, by the time the Kamara stuff, kind of, we'll talk about that later, but like he's just going to skyrocket, right? He probably end up being, a mid to an early round 3rd pick, and you'll have some people even willing to be more aggressive on him.
If we get that Amir Abdullah, just one cut he had.
I'll never forget that.
Unbelievable. Kerryon Johnson had an unreal run too against the Raiders, I remember, in a random preseason 3rd quarter. All right, 2 more of these, everyone. Pittsburgh Steelers. Hey, we're not sure who's going to be under center. Tragically, it seems like it's more of a Trubisky-Rudolph competition right now. Kenny Pickett working with most of the 3s. But Dwayne, there's one thing Pittsburgh can do. I mean, they can do a lot of things, I guess. I'm no way trying to slander that organization, but my goodness, they know how to draft great wide receivers. Question is, who exactly is going to be in 2 wide receiver sets?
Yeah. So I think, and that's the question I wrote last week. If I were to rewrite this question now, I think the thing you brought up is huge. If Mason Rudolph somehow wins this, that would really worry me based on what we've seen from Mason Rudolph.
Yeah.
And it would also tell me that, okay, what if Mason Rudolph gets benched later in the season? We may not really have any outs here. We may not have an out with Trubisky. We may not have an out, with Kenny Pickett. Trubisky, we've talked about him in the past, not really great, but at least he has supported some okay stuff from, Allen Robinson, when he was with the Bears. But wow, like if we do see, this situation play out that way, that would be very concerning to me. But yeah, writing this before that news came out, it's just around who's going to play in the 2 wide looks, because we've heard rumors that maybe Claypool gets to play more from the slot, but does that mean maybe he's not on the field when they're in 3 wide? Because we've had George Pickens, the rookie, playing really well, right? And Pickens is a guy that really did some nice things in the metrics we like to look at.
They're saying he's starting from day one. We're just not to your point. We're not sure if Claypool big slot in 3 wide receiver sets and back out in 2.
Yeah. So, but if we've got an offense that wants to be multiple, which Matt Canada will, most likely, it seems like you would just want to run 3 wides with these receivers, but we're not coaches. They got to get Zach Gentry on the field.
I was just going to say that.
But, and they're going to want to try to run the ball, use play action. They want to be more efficient. They're not going to throw the ball as much, this year. So it's a shrinking pie for everyone, but the receiver that gets to stay out there whenever you're in the 2 wide receiver sets, if you're going to use 12 personnel and some of these other things, right? You just got more outs to score fantasy points because you're on the field. So there's a chance that could be Pickens, over Claypool. I feel pretty good about where Deontay Johnson is. He seems, to be okay, but we would probably need to monitor his name as well, Ian. So I think it's just a situation that we have to look at. And again, like the other thing that could happen easily is that it's just a rotation across all 3 guys, right? Whenever they're playing out of these different formations besides 11 personnel. So I think it's actually a pretty big story, to monitor, especially if we were to think Deontay Johnson was in some sort of a, committee, because we've already talked about the concerns with Johnson. That goes back to the quarterback as well. And he's been a great player, but the ADP, you've got to spend a 4th round pick to get Deontay. So at least with Claypool, you're like, okay, I'll throw a 10th or 11th. It's not going to kill you if you miss. George Pickens, another name moving up massively, up to fantasy draft boards, so he is, I think, moved up 3 rounds maybe since these training camp reports. Now, he's still not an expensive player. You can get him like round 13, 14 of sharper drafts. Home leagues, probably still going undrafted. But at the end of the day, like, Pickens isn't going to kill you, right, if you get that situation wrong. But Deontay Johnson, on the other hand, like, I think we definitely need to take note.
Deontay, one of a few players participating in this new phenomenon, holding in, where you go to training camp, but you're just there. You're not gonna practice. I think he has been doing some stuff off on the side, like during practice, but it's just hilarious, Dwain, to me. Like, you show up, it'd be like showing up to school and just like sitting in the corner, like, hey, I'm here. Mark me down as yes, but I am not doing whatever the hell you're trying to ask me.
We had that in my school. It was called in-school suspension, Ian.
Yeah. But this would be like if it was benefiting the student. Like, I don't know. So,
I'm with you.
Also, Calvin Austin, all 160 pounds of him soaking wet, apparently flashing every single day with that speed. Exactly the type of player that you would expect to be flashing, before the pads come on. But to his credit, maybe he continues doing so with that going on. NBC Sports' Peter King did report that Trubisky has, quote unquote, basically been told the job is his to lose. So to your point, Dwain, would be especially concerning for Rudolph to still find a way to win there. I know many have been quick to say, like, watch Big Ben last year. How could anybody be worse? Hey, it's Mason Rudolph, Mitch Trubisky, man. As we said, why the hell is it between Muhammad and McLovin? That's kind of what we're looking at here. Final point, though, amidst all the George Pickens hype, and hey, I saw the route, man. He looks smooth as hell out there. And we talked about him being this potential alpha in the 2nd, 3rd round, that if he had just been healthy for his last year at Georgia, could have easily been a day 1 pick. I will say, the freaking picture that got like 10,000 likes on Twitter. He dropped that pass. Like, this is training camp where a cool picture of someone dropping a pass goes viral. And also, I did pick up in one of these just mini articles I was scanning through, he was getting apparently yelled at for just not doing well in a blocking drill or throughout a practice, not blocking well. So, hey, maybe it was one freaking drill, one thing the beat reporter heard, and we'll never hear about it again. But if we're trying to figure out who's going to be on the field full time, Dwain, this becomes, a constant issue. Remember this moment, or it was nothing, and I'll just, I won't take the blame for it. So great position for me to be in there. Final one here, Tennessee Titans. I feel like we're already on the right side of things here, Dwain. It's August. We're not big victory lap people to begin with, but the Julio, the Will Fuller situations, there are times where we know the ADP is going to move. And when we do so many best ball drafts, we're trying to take advantage of that, fading some of the early offseason Treylon Burks noise. I think we can already say that was a win.
Yeah, it really sounds at this point like he is going to have a starting role. So again, ADP is just great here with a guy like Burks, because of the asthma / workout issues, his ADP got pushed down after minicamp. Like, he was creeping into the 6 rounds of some fantasy drafts, which was a bit rich. And now he goes in round 8. Sometimes he goes in round 9. So, and again, those are in sharper drafts in your home leagues. He's going to go round 10 or 11. So I just love the price tag we're getting. I get it. It is a run heavy offense. And if you look at it, people immediately, like, if you say anything about Treylon Burks, is so funny. They'll be, well, what did AJ Brown really ever do? And you're like, dude, like, if you looked at the game logs for AJ Brown, like when healthy, like how many points he put up, and we're not saying he's AJ Brown, but the point being, in a heavy play action offense that wants to be built after efficiency, these yak guys, they can do well. And so Burks, the main question for Burks is, can he beat this outside coverage? Because he did get used in the slot, got used in the backfield a lot in college. And some people immediately say that, well, that's because Treylon Burks isn't any good. And you and I have talked about it. Like, it is a question. Like, is Burks just really more of a gadget player? We can't be for sure. But at the same time, like, you guys can't put that on him. Like, what if it's because the Arkansas quarterbacks were terrible, which they pretty much were, and they're just trying to give someone an easy way to make a completion to the best player on their team when you got to play in the SEC? Like, that's also in the range of outcomes for Burke. So when I look at him, I'm with you. I think we've already basically heard enough that he's going to be out there. He's most likely going to be a starter alongside Robert Woods, and he gives us that big play upside. You can get him later in drafts. We'll continue to monitor it, but it does sound like he's going to have a starting role.
That's before we just completely wrap things up. Skyy Moore says he's okay. So that's great news.
Nice.
Hopefully, he's just perfectly okay. He's back out there tomorrow. All we have is him giving an I'm okay with a thumbs up emoji on Instagram. Sounds like he's 100% to me, Dwain, but we'll see. Obviously, we'll be back with an NFC version of this podcast. Also getting together, hopefully tonight, assuming the drafts fill, but I don't think we're going to have too many more problems with that, Dwain, as we get closer to week one. Going to be recording another Football Guys Championship, trying to bring home that $500K. Again, Dwain, people can find your AFC, NFC main training camp storyline questions over at pff.com. What else do you have coming out this week?
Already released today the top 10 players that could smash your league basically once you get past round 7 in your drafts. And so, again, not focusing on these earlier round, but truly trying to isolate down on, what we think the top 10 options can be. And it's across all the different positions. And then tomorrow we'll have the opposite. So if we're looking at round 7 and later, for those players that could hit, we're going to look at the rounds 1 through 6 to just talk about who are the players that you should probably be avoiding in that range based on their ADP and some of the other data right now.
I had a couple studies go up this week. Which teams are most willing to use their workhorse running back? Basically looking at every play caller and just the percentage of games that they've given a single running back, 90%, 75%, 60% of the workload. Pittsburgh, the Rams, shout out maybe Cam Akers. We're going to talk a little bit more about him and Darrell Henderson in the next podcast. There are some good takeaways there. Also went ahead and looked at the history of teams enabling multiple great running backs and wide receivers in the same offense, something that, we like to talk about, and we have many of them ranked that way, but want to actually put into context how often it happens, how many groups were expecting it to happen in 2022, maybe who could be undervalued accordingly. So make sure you guys check that out, pff.com. And of course, Dwain and I will be back throughout the entire offseason and season, just barking, having a good time. So for Dwain, I'm Ian. Thanks as always for tuning in to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.